Welcome to Childled's webinar on guiding children's behaviour. Childled is a management application for early childhood settings, daycare and after-school programs. Childled has everything from attendance, risk assessments, parental communication, invoicing, accident forms and much more. To learn more, visit us at teachcloud.com or email hello@teachcloud.com. This webinar is accompanied by Cloud Academy's Guiding Children's Behaviour 1-hour masterclass with a certificate of completion. The masterclass focuses on 7 main areas which include factors that influence behaviour, functions of behaviour, evaluating behaviour using the ABC model, practical strategies for behaviours that concern, and 10 focused, proactive strategies such as the bucket list. Be sure to check out the masterclass on app.cloudacademy.com. Don't forget, you can also view all of our previous webinars on teachcloud.com/webinars. We're excited to bring you a panel of experts on children's behaviour. Let's start the webinar with a quick introduction from our expert panelists.
Thank you so much. It's so lovely to be here. I'm Cassandra from Nanny Knows. I founded Nanny Knows about 3 years ago with the aim to spread, conscious discipline and positive parenting. And then we founded, I'm a founder member of the Conscious Parenting Association of South Africa. We founded that about a year ago. And just to spread awareness on, really creating conscious classrooms, conscious parenting, all of that good stuff. So I've got an early childhood development program that I developed that incorporates a lot of that, positive and conscious discipline into the program. I host baby and toddler sessions. I've got a play group. So yeah, lots of good stuff around all of this conscious discipline.
Great, thanks for that, Cassandra. And we'll definitely be going into that conscious, as you call it, conscious discipline and really looking at that. So I'd like to move to Cindy Curry now.
Hi, welcome everyone. I'm so happy to be here. I'm actually located in Portage la Prairie, Manitoba, Canada. I have been an early childhood educator level 3 for over 32 years. So I've been on the field, feet on the floor, front lines for all those years. I've also done a bunch of other stuff. I'm a forest and nature school practitioner. I instruct in the early childhood education program in our province, and I belong on the International Play Association Canada board. So playing and working with kids and having a really positive experience is definitely at the core of what I do. I still run a group family childcare program based on that philosophy of building connections with kids, and in that way helping those people with those challenging behaviors to navigate those and to have some positive experiences.
Great. And yeah, we're definitely going to be looking at as well, I always say the positive guidance of behavior, but yeah, we'll definitely be looking at that. Thanks so much for that, Cindy. And last but not least, Shreya, if you give us a little introduction and just tell us where you're coming from today.
Of course. Hi, everyone. My name is Shreya. I currently work as an early childhood and social emotional learning researcher at Harvard University. I'm primarily interested in thinking about how we can improve the quality of programs and that serve children and families, and how we can connect research and practice to actually improve the programs that are available for children currently. I'm originally from India, but I'm currently based in Cambridge, United States, because I came here 2 years back to pursue my master's, and I've been here ever since. Before I pivoted to research, most of my experience was with working with children directly. So I've worked in the capacity of a teacher as well as a school counseling intern. And before that, I also have some experience in designing, managing, and implementing education support programs for children in schools and shelter homes, as well as communities. I'm just so happy to be here and to learn from all of you, and I'm looking forward to our conversation.
Great, thank you so much for that introduction. So you can see here we have a really nice mix, and I think it's going to be a really exciting discussion. So I'm going to dive straight into our first question. L.R. Nost in the book, The Gentle Parent, Positive, Practical, Effective Discipline is quoted as saying, "Not every action by our children is a sign of trauma or deep unresolved issues, but every behavior is communication. Behaviors can communicate simple needs such as hunger or the need for sleep. but they can also communicate unmet needs, such as the need to be heard or the need to reconnect. They can communicate stress or discomfort over changes in routine or sickness, or they can communicate big emotions our children need help processing. So the question to our panelists is, can you talk a little bit about the saying, all behavior is communication, and how educators and parents can use this mindset to support positive approaches to behavior?
I think one of the biggest things is, conventional discipline, if we have to look at it that way, looks at behavior only. So if a child is behaving a certain way, the child has to be punished, or if they're so-called labeled good, then they be rewarded. So a lot of the conventional discipline was always just looking at the behavior itself. And when we say, behavior is communication, it's what's underneath that behavior. And what usually drives behavior is a feeling. It always starts with, first a thought then spurs on an emotion, and then we start feeling a certain way. And based on that feeling, then we behave a certain way. So if we can get underneath that behavior and just understand, what is that person feeling or that child feeling? Let's get underneath that, and then why are they behaving that way? That's really why, we're looking at behavior being communication, and really getting underneath that. If we look at, the iceberg theory, the behavior is the tip of the iceberg. All those feelings are what's underneath, and it's just about decoding that behavior.
And thanks, Cassandra. And how do we look underneath that iceberg to see what's really going on with the child? What would be your number one strategy for educators and parents?
Become curious, because if we look at behavior itself as just behavior, the first thing, well, what's that person feeling? What could potentially be, and it usually starts with fear, so anger is spurred on by fear, jealousy is spurred on by fear. All of those, underlying emotions are usually driven by one of the biggest emotions, which is fear. So I would just encourage people to become curious. That would be my number one thing, and communicate. Empathize with that person, and I hear what you're saying, or I see that you're behaving like that. That might not necessarily be okay, but let's figure out what's going on here, really.
I'd like to add that when I'm looking at children's behavior, and that whole communication piece is what is developmentally appropriate as well, because some kids can't verbalize how they're feeling and the challenges and the stresses that they're having. I like to remind my staff when they're looking at kids is that this little person has only been on the earth 12 months, 24 months, like they're still trying to figure it all out as well. And they're doing the best they can with the tools that they have at that point. So yeah, taking that time to make those connections with the kids and figure out what is it that they're trying to tell you. I had a really good example this morning. A little guy was playing really well, and then all of a sudden he started to what we would consider acting out. It was just about lunchtime. So knowing him and having that connection, his behavior was telling us that he was hungry. He's only 12 months. So we know that that's where that behavior is leading to.
Also add on to what Cassandra mentioned earlier in terms of understanding emotion and understanding what is happening behind an emotion. I think one thing I think about is being able to observe children to understand what are times or certain times of the day or certain instances when they tend to exhibit the behavior, and what has kind of happened before that or what's happening around that. And I think that might help us find patterns to understand what are the certain triggers that might be helping them or causing them to feel a certain way. And I think, again, coming back to what Cindy said about establishing connections, I think that's so important because it helps you both anticipate their needs as well as understand cues from them and understand what are the triggers that is helping them feel this way. And then you also have understanding of what can we then do to help them regulate and calm down and feel better about what they're feeling at the moment.
They're really great points, Shreya. And just following on from the importance of trying to understand the child's actions from the child's point of view and almost becoming a detective, looking at the times the child may engage in a certain behavior, but most of all being assertive in communicating with the child, I'd now like to look at the functions of behavior. So in Cloud Academy's masterclass, which is available to everyone watching, we talk about the functions of the behavior model, which we tweaked slightly to the REST model. So in the REST model, with regards to the functions of behavior, the R stands for relationship seeking, where the child may engage in certain behaviors because they're seeking connection. The E stands for escape, where they may act in a specific way to escape a situation or activity. The S stands for sensory, or engaging in a certain behavior such as rocking for sensorial purposes. And finally, the T is for tangible, where the child acts in a certain way to gain something such as a chocolate bar, for example. So, can we talk more about the functions of behavior and what steps educators can take to better support positive interactions with children? So, for example, a child acting in a certain way to escape an activity.
What kind of activity are we thinking that they're trying to escape? Because is it something that they just don't like? So if it's not something they enjoy, and we as the adults think that the kids need to attend that activity, what is our goal? So for example, if we're looking at a circle time, and in our adult mind, we think everybody needs to attend this circle time, and our goal is to get children to sit, is that developmentally appropriate? Because for 2-year-olds and 3-year-olds and 4-year-olds and sometimes 5, a lot of kids need to move to learn. And so that expectation that we have isn't developmentally appropriate for that child. So the kids then are going to have those behaviors that are very clearly telling us that they don't want to do that activity. If it's something like fine motor skills, then maybe we need to find something that is actually of interest to them versus the activity that we think they should do. So it's taking off that adult lens and looking at it from the child's point of view, and thinking about that all children do learn differently, and thinking about Howard Gardner, and he showed us that all kids learn in a different way. So what else can I offer to help that child develop whatever that skill is that I want them to develop?
And Cindy, just sticking with that point, would you say then it's kind of like a mindset shift sometimes? Because like you said, sometimes we want children to sit, but actually, is that age appropriate? Is it even needed? And what would you kind of say to that, where maybe some educators struggle with that? Like, this is how we do things, but sometimes we actually have to look at the age and stage of the child.
Yeah, definitely, Wendy. It's you need to take off that piece that we as teachers sometimes think we need to be in control, and we need to relax that and say, this is what the kids need. Because when we're making them do an activity that we think they should do, it's very adult focused. Whereas if we want the kids to benefit from whatever that goal is that we have that underlies that activity, we need to offer those kinds of things that they're actually interested in. So it is quite often a big mind shift for adults to let that control go, and to have control with children instead of over children.
Yeah, that's a great point, Cindy. I really love that, control with children instead of over children. Really great point there. Shreya, Cassandra, do you want to add to that sentiment?
Really love what Cindy had mentioned there about control, because that was one of my thoughts. When we're in a classroom setting, a lot of the time the teacher is looked at as this sort of authoritarian figure, and it's really just about letting kids lead in their learning. And as soon as children are they've got that child-led learning, they become interested in what they're learning. As soon as you're trying to force any learning or coerce them into learning a specific thing, the brain almost shuts down, because they're not necessarily interested in that. So the child-led learning is extremely important. There was another thing that I wanted to add, based on, picking up on kids' cues as well. As soon as kids, lose eye contact, or, they shift over to another activity, two things can either happen. They either have mastered that skill, so coming back to it is, not necessarily productive to them, and doesn't foster their learning experience, or they're just not interested in that moment. But if we keep repetitively reintroducing certain activities to them, different times of the day, they might come back to that activity. So repetition is extremely important for them as well. It just depends on where the child's interest is in that moment. And although, one of the things I'm very aware of is in big classroom settings, this can be extremely difficult. If you've got 30 kids with, 30 different interests, it can be difficult for educators, but this is really where, if we foster that, that independent learning, and where we ask questions, this is really where they can thrive as a group. Rather than teaching and telling constantly, we're asking questions to really encourage that curiosity.
think one more thing I also think about is trying different things, because sometimes, as much as we would like little kids to tell us what is the problem they're facing or why it is that they're facing particular difficulty, they're not able to communicate. And the more we try different strategies with them, then we know what stakes, and it helps to understand what might have been the reason they might have been struggling. So I think one example I think of is recently I was working with a little child on her reading, and she was learning her ABCs. And every time we came to one particular point of the activity, she would want to get up and go to the washroom, and that happened every day. So I soon realized that it's not that she has to go to the washroom every time. Clearly, she's trying to avoid trying to do a particular activity. So I just then think about, is it too difficult for her? Is it because she's not seeing progress? Is it because they've already worked on something for 10 minutes and she's already lost and doesn't want to move on? There's so many reasons why her behavior could have been what it was. So I had to try different strategies as to introducing some kind of progress monitoring system, or like trying to do this activity before I did something else, finally understand what sticked. And I think that really helped to continue working with her post that, because doing those different things helped me realize which of these strategies work best with her, and I was able to stick with that. So she was able to continue doing what she had to. So I think just trying different things and trying to anticipate those needs also does help sometimes.
I think really also understanding and getting to know the individual child, like you were saying there. But even though this is a general webinar, are there any specific strategies that you would have for educators or parents when they know a child is engaging in a certain behavior, for example, like biting, out of frustration or because the child is overwhelmed? Do you have any tips?
The first thing, I would say is that we have to look at why they're biting, right? A lot of the time, especially with youngsters, it's an impulse thing. It's the only way that they really know how to express that frustration, for whatever reason it might have been. And then it's about teaching them coping strategies. So whatever they might be frustrated about, teaching them how to recognize that frustration within themselves, why they might have been frustrated, and then teaching them other coping strategies rather than trying to punish the biting and only seeing the biting as a behavior. So then again, it's coming back to what's underneath the behavior, because they're not biting necessarily because they're bad kids or because they want to hurt somebody else. It's just an impulse thing where they lack the control to actually have control in that moment.
Something else I also think about, and I think about behaviors when the children tend to exhibit an extremely overwhelmed, is thinking about how the brain functions. I mean, I'm not sure how, I'm sure people might have come across the hand model of the brain. We talk about how this is the brain, and this is the thinking part of your brain, and this is the feeling part of your brain, and how usually when you tend to be overwhelmed, you flip your lid. So your thinking part and feeling part are not kind of communicating with each other. So in the moment, trying to reason with them or trying to provide them, trying to help them might not always help, because they're not rationalizing what you're saying, or they're not thinking clearly about their actions. So I think in situations like that, like having practice activities before the event is to occur might also just help. So I think consistent social emotional learning lessons in some way is helpful, right? Trying to talk to them about what are appropriate versus inappropriate behaviors and what can they do instead of biting. So offering an alternative. So also setting those limits, saying, I understand you're upset, but I can't let you bite me. Can we do something? And offering them an alternative of what they could do instead to kind of express their feeling of frustration might also be something that's helpful, but also it might not always work in the moment. So I think it's also helpful to think about how we can kind of prelay some of those strategies and teach to them beforehand. So when they're in the moment, they would apply that versus exhibiting behaviors that might not be appropriate in that set context.
That really great example there with the hand. I think that's by Dr. Dan Siegel. So sometimes they're not able to rationalize that. So it's actually, even yourself, you need to maybe step away, pause, and then come back to it. Because if you're trying to talk to them when they're kind of in that state, it might not work. So help them to actually calm and soothe first. So just moving on to the next question, which we've kind of gone from being frustrated, overwhelmed, and now I just want to talk about a little bit about social emotional learning. And we've touched on this throughout every question, but the Committee for Children defines social emotional learning as the process of developing the self-awareness, self-control, and interpersonal skills that are vital for school work and life success, right? So having these skills feeds into the holistic development of the child and of course their academic success. But with this in mind, what are some general positive approaches or strategies that educators and parents can help children to manage their emotions?
Well, when I think about it, when we think of managing, we first need to know what emotions are, and once kids can learn that, we start with the basic emotions of happy, sad, angry, and scared, and we're always building on that, and then we can teach different emotion vocabulary. We can teach emotion vocabulary, so different words for different emotions, so happy can sound like contented or joyous or whatever the case. So our vocabulary in that sense builds. And once we understand that, we start going inwards and we start looking, okay, well, I'm feeling a certain way. Why am I feeling that way? And then again, we come back to the coping strategies. When I'm feeling this way, before I react in the situation, what can I do about it? You can look anything like going from a walk, meditating, listening to music, whatever works for, because we're all different. So whatever works for the person. And if we teach kids this, this is so monumental. It creates such a shift. And a lot of the time it's us learning this within ourselves because we were taught, don't cry. So a lot of the time we don't even know, I've been working with adults recently who said, can I express? Of course we can, but because we've been told, don't cry, it's okay, and all our feelings were dismissed, we were taught, it's not okay to express. So that's the other thing that we can do, is really let people know, now I'm really angry, because this happened, and when I feel this way, this is what I can do about it. So we're really going inward within ourselves. So firstly, modeling it, excellent, and then teaching, the actual emotions and what we can do with it is so beneficial for kids.
Yes, and I think that applies to all children. Social and emotional development is so important. It doesn't matter if the child has been, diagnosed with, specific maybe behavioral difficulty. Really looking at that child and trying to connect with that child is really where amazing learning happens. And we have a question from one of the audience members on oppositional defiant disorder. So she's saying that one of the children in the setting has been diagnosed with this, and they're kind of at a loss because they're really trying to communicate and connect with the child, but it just seems that the child isn't listening. So would you have any tips on that?
What I would say is my biggest go-to always is connecting. What are we doing to connect with the kids? When a child is being defiant in any way, or that's the behavior that we're perceiving, that's the behavior, they're not being cooperative. Why is that the case? Getting underneath that behavior again. So the biggest thing that I go back to is connection. What are we doing to connect with the kids? What are we doing to meet them at their needs, whilst also meeting our needs? So that's the biggest thing that I go back to.
And with the whole piece of developing those social and emotional skills is certainly helping children identify how they're feeling, but then we also take that next step and say, okay, how do you think the child you're playing with is feeling, or how do you think that child is feeling, and helping them identify those feelings in other kids as well. And it's really interesting how empathetic the kids that I work with can be. They'll see somebody crying and they'll go and find their favorite stuffed animal, or they'll go to the freezer and they'll get a boo-boo square because their friend is hurt. And so helping to identify those feelings in each other really helps that social and emotional piece grow as well.
And also, just to add, Wendy, because I think you really mentioned this point as well, in the sense that if we can reframe those sort of behaviors, it's very difficult when we put a label on something, because then that's all we see. So if we can reframe it in such a way that we actually see strengths in that child rather than that child being defiant, they can be anything: bold, gutsy, assertive. If we start seeing those strengths, that child will immediately also not start or not behave in defiance anymore, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And I think sometimes when you're helping children who you may perceive to be engaging in behaviors that concern, or that are engaging in behaviors that concern, you might start to almost become negative and focus on maybe what you believe is not going right. But I think, like, like you're saying, if we can celebrate the strengths, and really look at the child's interests and then bring those interests into the learning environment, it really helps. And we actually have a comment here just saying that the environment plays a huge role in learning, and they're talking about here about Maria Montessori and the prepared environment. And I think that's also really important, especially if you are working with a child, for example, who gets, might be overloaded when it comes to their senses, just making sure that the environment is conducive to learning, but that it also incorporates things that the child is interested in, is really important. So just moving on slightly from that, when you are working with children, what are some phrases that you can use, not only to encourage them, but to acknowledge what they're feeling, or just to help them even express themselves?
One of the things, well, amongst many that we could say to them, but just to let them know that we see them, so I see that you're feeling frustrated. And a lot of the time, especially with little ones, they do not have the words, so by us putting words to their feeling and why they're feeling that way, and then we can ask the question, well, what do you think we could do about that? Or what do you think you can do about the situation? That really empowers them to make a decision on how to manage it. And we'll be surprised at how often they can come up with their own solutions if we just give them the opportunity. And if the solution doesn't work, for example, we were talking about the biting earlier, they might be so frustrated at their friend, and then the solution is, oh, I'm so frustrated, I just want to bite my friend for taking my toy. And we could respond, you could do that. Well, what else could you do? So then giving them just the tools to think of, other solutions as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think really involving the child as well in their own decisions, because there was a comment in the chat box about kind of a lack of control that children may feel. And then, just like yourself as an adult, when you feel out of control, you may act in an impulsive manner, or an erratic manner. It's the exact same for children. Actually, a lot of times we take the control away from children because we think we know better, and we talk about children instead of like actually finding solutions with them. So I think that's a really great point there, Cassandra. Anyone else want to touch on that?
Yeah, I think just to add on to what Cassandra said, I think what's also important again in a situation like that is they should have already ideally be exposed to different kind of coping strategies that they could potentially employ in a situation like that. So again, I think comes back to what we were talking about in terms of social emotional instruction, and as to how it can't just be a one time in a day or once in a week kind of activity, but something that is embedded through their day, both at school and at home, either through like center time or like to week to morning check-ins or through story time as well for that matter. And different opportunities where they actually practice these skills. So when they're actually in an event where they're feeling the overwhelming emotions, they already have those skills and the tools to kind of deal with it with support from the adults. So I think, like Cassandra mentioned, if in that particular moment, the child already knows, okay, I can either do a breathing exercise, or I can go out and take a walk, or I can listen to the music. They're able to then pick and choose as to, okay, I mean, I know I'm feeling this way, and maybe this is something I want to do instead of bite my friend or fight with them, or whatever else they may be doing, which might not be appropriate in the context.
And just to build on that, I think in making sure that the environment does have those spaces that children can get away. So often in group care, they really lack those spaces where kids can just get away and take that time and have that breath and then come back in. I had a little girl just through COVID. She was with us until she was just before 2, spent 2 years at home because of COVID, came back. And so she spent 2 years with mom and dad and a baby brother, and that was it. And so it took her a little bit to not think she needed everything immediately from everybody, every adult in the room. And she's now learned in a very quick time to, okay, I need to go, I need to find my baby bear, because that's her support, take a breath, and then she can re-enter again. So she's starting to understand her feelings and be able to say, I'm frustrated. And she's been able to verbalize that because we've given her that language.
Yeah, I think just even summarizing everything, I always think of it like the child's little toolbox. So sometimes we start to try and understand like certain behaviors when they're happening, and we say we'll just implement the strategy and it'll fix everything. But actually, like throughout preschool, we're looking at social and emotional learning all of the time and the holistic development of the child. So like if we're able to give that child all those tools and they carry it around their little toolbox, then when something happens, they can say, oh, I have a little strategy. I can pull that out of my toolbox and I can actually implement that. And I think, again, as well, what Cindy was saying there about a rest area, sometimes something as small as that, where they can know, I'm actually feeling a bit kind of upset. I'm not really into this today. Maybe I'm tired. Maybe I'm hungry. I'm going to go to the rest area and just take a break, right? And that they're allowed to do that. And they're not kind of like questioned, like, why are you over in the rest area for 30 seconds? Sometimes they just need a break, just like we as adults do as well. This question is an interesting question. It's coming from Brenda Ward, and it's to do with inspections. So she's wondering what our thoughts are here on inspections. She had an inspector in a room who was not happy that a certain child did not want to join circle time. And sometimes we can find this, that an inspector can come in and they're like, no, you need to force the children to join a specific activity. And then you have educators who are like, no, sometimes children need a bit of a break, or they'll come back when they're ready. We like to give them choice. So in that kind of in that area, do you have any tips for educators on how to handle this, especially when it's an inspector and you might be feeling they know best and they can fail me for this inspection?
I think for me, I think it's really important that we have the language and the research that backs it up, and we can say, you know what, this is what I believe, this is why I believe it, and this is the research that says that it's okay that this child does not have to sit in circle time, or this child does not have to participate in this, and be able to have that proof and say, this is why, this is my philosophy, and this is why we run this way. And I think if we can feel that we're the professionals and we're empowered, then we can show those inspectors and coordinators or whatever the management is that comes in and questions what we're doing. I think that's a really important piece of it.
That's so important, because you have to be confident in what you're saying. And I think that confidence comes from your knowledge, your expertise. But like you're saying there, Cindy, also the research to actually back up what you believe. We have another question here from an audience member who's essentially asking, how to help a child who is always seeking one-to-one attention. And so they're always kind of seeking an adult. And like I said at the start, I've kind of changed my mindset to, they're not seeking attention, they're more seeking like relationships and connectedness, and maybe even to look at what's going on for the child at home. Sometimes if a child has a new sibling, they might not be getting as much attention as they were getting at home, or maybe as much connectedness, and so they're coming into preschool, really almost like craving that that kind of connectedness with an adult. But just put it to the panel, any tips on that?
I really liked how you reframed that, Wendy, to talk about it as it's relationship seeking versus being attention seeking, and as to how it necessarily is not a negative behavior, but maybe they're trying to ask for something that they're not getting in a different setting, and they think that the school or the preschool is the best place for them to get that support they think they need at that point in time. I think one thing I think about is, again, if it is possible to have a conversation with the child to help them understand, at this point in time, I can't be here because someone else needs me, but I'm so interested in learning about what you have to show me or what you want to talk to me about. So maybe you can put it aside in this little box, and then when I have time and I come and sit with you, we can maybe you can show me what you have together. So maybe putting aside those pockets of time and letting them know that, I'm going to do this first, but I will come back and I'm really interested in knowing what you want to show me. So maybe you can put it aside, and when we are together, you can then show it to me. So maybe setting those kind of limits might be helpful, because I think in doing something like that, you're not telling the child you're not available for them. You're telling them you will be available for them, maybe just not at that very particular moment, but you're going to come back and you're going to express interest and show a lot of curiosity in what it is that they are willing to share with you at that point in time. So I'm wondering if something like that might be helpful, so the child knows that it's not that they're being neglected, but they will eventually get the support that they require, just not that very minute.
I think that's a great point that Shreya just made. And also perhaps, if the positive reinforcement is there, the attention is there perhaps not another unmet need, that we maybe misunderstanding what that need is, in the sense of it looks like attention, but the child actually needs something else. And sometimes just leaning in and having that conversation with the kids, and letting them know, I see you, and I hear that you need something from me. I'm not understanding what it is, can you explain it to me? If they're not verbal, we could use other tools. But if they are at that point where they are verbal and, we perceive it to be attention, perhaps it's something else.
You're so right, Cassandra, and I think that's just the importance of really being tuned into the child and their own needs, because unmet needs can result in behavior that we then don't understand or we don't know where it's coming from. And just to shift gears a little bit, we've been talking a lot about the children and their families, but just for the educators, what kind of tips would you give them to manage their own emotions? Sometimes we can be triggered when a child displays or acts in a certain way. So, any tips for the actual educators?
Has that whiny voice. It's like, oh my gosh. So being able to check myself and saying, okay, take a breath, and now let's help this child navigate whatever that is. So really knowing yourself. And sometimes that's looking back at how you were raised. If you look at Circles of Security, that's a wonderful program that allows you to look at your own self and figure out what those triggers are, and then being able to work with somebody and tag off or take that breath and say, okay, you know what, I need a couple minutes just to refocus and then to come back again. Sometimes that's all we need as adults.
Self-care, and again, self-awareness is one thing, knowing really what's going on with us, as Cindy had mentioned, and self-care I think is extremely important as well. We have this misconception of what self-care actually looks like, having your nails done or your hair done, or and if that's what you want to do, then great, but really just having an inward look at yourself, constantly keeping yourself emotionally in check, mentally in check, and whatever that looks like to different people, but just really taking care of yourself as a person, because if your cup is not full and you're not looking after yourself, you can't be that person that other people need you to be. So a lot of people feel selfish in that sense, that I need to look at myself first, but unfortunately, or fortunately, depending on how we look at it, it is something that you cannot help other people if your cup is not full.
One thing I was just thinking about when both the panels are sharing is also just for parents and teachers both recognize that the child's behavior is not their fault, like as in either the child or the parents or the teacher's fault for that matter. It's just that the child is still learning to communicate and is still learning about what are appropriate and inappropriate ways to express themselves. So it's both a learning journey for the child, and all we are here to do as adults is to support them through that process. It's not necessarily our fault that the child is acting a certain way, and to give yourself a grace to recognize that. And also sometimes I think it's just maybe just given everything else going on, especially with COVID right now, is also just to pick your battles and figure out what are those extreme behaviors that you really need to address right in the moment, and what are some things that you can slide, like you can allow to slide for now and come back to it later, because our capacity is only that much at this given point in time. So also I think being wise to understand what are some certain situations where it's okay to take a step back and give the child extra screen time or whatever else given the demands at that particular point in time, and something can come back to later, versus a situation where the child is seriously facing harm in those situations where you probably have to step in. So I think picking and choosing battles when you're at your capacity is something that might just be helpful at this time.
I think both Cassandra, Cindy, and Shreya have really said everything that needs to be said. And although we hear it all the time, you really can't pour from an empty cup. And sometimes, like that, you have to choose your battles, especially during times like this with COVID. There's a lot going on. But I think, yeah, what's really coming through is that focusing on relationships. So we just want to quickly move on now to children who are nonverbal. So, is there any tips or strategies that you would recommend for educators and or for parents when it comes to supporting children who maybe just find it difficult to express themselves or are actually nonverbal?
I work with babies, and we teach them sign language from a very young age. So they actually are able to start using signs and gestures far before they can actually talk. So I think that's one of the biggest tools that we can use with little ones. Anything from milk to eat, they start expressing those types of things before they can talk. And then when we do look at the emotions, happy, we like, and you can have a sound with it as well, or scared, and you do this, and or sad, so you're using the word with the gesture as well, but they start understanding, and they start developing that emotional intelligence.
going to build on what Cassandra had said is yeah, we have several young children and even some that are getting a little bit older, 2, just about 3, who don't have a lot of language or are nonverbal. And so being able to figure out what they want and saying, oh, this is what you're wanting, and giving them the words for it, or this is how you're feeling. And certainly if you're wrong, they will tell you. You never have to worry about that. But being able to just repeat back what that language is that they're wanting or trying to tell you, so they're also hearing it as well as making that connection with you.
One more thing I would add to that, especially when it comes to talking about learning about emotions and understanding them and so on, I think visuals really, really help, especially I think in pre-K and kindergarten classrooms. I've been in classrooms where they've had like charts with different emotions and their faces, and the children able to point to say, oh, this is how I'm feeling this particular day, something like that, or even visuals where we want to understand what's happening physiologically in your body when you're experiencing a certain emotion, where you have an outline of the body with the different parts to try and identify what's happening. And so are you feeling something in your stomach? Are your cheeks feeling flushed? Are your legs feeling wobbly? So that these are things that children are able to point to help express how they're feeling at a given point in time. So visuals are also helpful. So children, even if they can't speak, they're at least able to point to communicate what they're trying to express. Or I think even creative mediums like drawing might be helpful, where they will draw how they're feeling at that given point in time, or draw what might be helpful for them, or even draw triggers that might be causing them to feel a certain way. So if there's a stage where they're able to do that, that's also something that might be helpful.
Yes, and I think we've probably touched on it a little bit, but visuals are just so impactful. Just having different kind of types of emotions that the child can point to when they're feeling a certain way, just to help them express themselves. Because as an adult, it's obviously very frustrating when either you're not being heard, or people don't understand you, or you just can't express yourself. And I almost think it's almost worse when you're a child because of that lack of control. But I think what's really rang throughout this whole webinar has been the importance of relationships, and just want to thank everyone for joining us today, and our expert panelists. And all of their contact details will be on our webinar page, so that's teachcloud.com/webinars. And if you have any questions for us on this webinar, or the use of the TeachCloud app for your nursery, daycare or early childhood service, email hello@teachcloud.com or visit teachcloud.com. TeachCloud is an easy-to-use early childhood and after-school app with everything you need in one place. TeachCloud helps you streamline and reduce paperwork, communicate with parents, and comply with regulations. Teachers can move through the app quickly with several options such as daily records, learning journals, instant messaging, attendance, risk assessments, and cleaning sheets. Tap the learning journal option to record observations and document emerging interests. Parents can view and sign learning stories too. TeachCloud's Learning Journal software also provides prompts to learning goals in your chosen curriculum. Send documents, images, videos, and reminders using TeachCloud's instant messaging feature. Individual and group messages with read receipts makes communicating with parents a breeze. Taking attendance is done at the click of a button. Request absence reasons from parents, and generate automatic attendance inspection-ready reports. Daily records such as medication, sleep, meals, and nappy changes can be recorded and signed. Accident forms can be documented and shared with parents using the free Parent app. Download or print records when you need to, or store everything on TeachCloud. The choice is yours. TeachCloud is easy to set up. Just add your rooms, children, and invite your teachers using the secure admin panel. Upload and share your policies with parents. Then quickly review parental consent and signatures, or announce policy updates. TeachCloud was created by an early childhood teacher just like you, so you know you're in good hands. Have any questions? We'd love to help. Contact us at teachcloud.com or email hello@teachcloud.com.